everybody. Welcome to the Independent City Council meeting. It's Tuesday, August 8th, 2023. Regular show the council is here, and everybody's happy, although they wish they were cookies. The minutes of the collective meeting are in your packet and do they need your approval? Opposed, second to approve. All in favor, signify by saying aye. Aye. And opposed, motion carries. Thank you very much.
I'm sorry, I did not hear the motion in the second.
Motion.
And then, Court.
Thank you.
I have to turn the microphone on here, although nobody has trouble hearing me. I don't see anybody stepping up for a visitor comment, and I have no pages, so I'll move forward. My mayor report, just to keep you informed what I've had the opportunity to be involved with. I got a chance to speak at the YMCA ribbon cutting for their new facility in Monmouth. Had a chance to participate, and talk to lots and lots of people at the National Night Out. It was a week ago. That was lots of fun. Attended this weekend the 3rd Street Block Party. Folks got a permit, blocked off part of 3rd Street for a block. There were 30-some people. There was live music. There was cornhole. There was dogs, burgers, salmon. There was goodies. It was a great time, and spent 3 hours there. It was lots and lots of fun. Got a chance to join a number of folks at the Western Oregon University Student Success kickoff there. They're doing a little bit of, President Peters got to knock down part of the old building, and they expect to have the new building up on sometime next year in 25. Is that next year? 2025. That's 2 years. Okay. Takes a while to get stuff and get it done. This morning, I had a chance to have city manager and I visited with Senator Patterson, along with League of Oregon City staff, giving them some details on measures 5 and 50 and the impacts not just to our community, but to cities around the state. It was a very positive meeting, and I'm going to guess that there is going to be additional conversations with additional legislators, and this is not something that's just that we're just talking about. The League of Oregon Cities is taking pretty aggressive action and moving forward, talking with legislators, as is the local council of governments. Also coming up, I'm going to be presenting this weekend at the Oregon Mayors Association, so I always enjoy doing that. And finally, for your calendars, the Council of Governments, our Mid-Willamette Valley Council of Governments, we're going to have a meeting with with legislators from the region, from Polk, Marion, and Yamhill. There will be a breakfast meeting on Thursday, September 28th. It'll be in Salem. Councilors are invited to attend, and we can visit with our legislators. There will also be opportunity to visit with other legislators from around the region, and we'll make sure we get you the major things that we are talking about related to our city and other cities, so that we all stay on point on message. And just as you know, I'm a volunteer at our local food bank, and last month they served just short of 4,000 people. That's 1,000 visits, and that's almost 4,000 people. And I got a chance to do a little lifting and carrying. So that's my report for the moment. I'm going to have our city manager give us her report. So Ms. West, to you.
Council. Karen, we're not on this one. Okay, well, I'll yell.
Or if you want to sit at your table and use your microphone there.
Is it?
I'd like to see her when she's speaking.
Well, if you'd eaten your broccoli,
I know I could have grown.
I'll yell really loud.
Okay.
I think without a microphone, people at home have trouble.
Right.
Oh,
with
true.
the
All
audio.
right, I'll see.
Yeah.
Yeah, all of them are good.
Test, 1, 2. Okay, well.
Can you hear me?
I think
Yes.
It isn't easy to be green.
Nope. Okay, it's a bad tech day.
We believe you.
It's fine. Okay. Well, most of what I was going to say, Council, you all know, I was going to say it for our community because it comes from my weekly reports. But if the community can't hear it, then I'm going to
Okay, we're going to take a moment and reconnect because we can do the report here. We have a few moments. We have a short agenda.
I love tech.
Where's this? You're okay, Karen. We know it's not you. It's the Russians.
I know, it says it's.
See, and I had tech success today.
You have tech success? We're just informal chattering here. No,
I know, and now you can't unnotice it.
I just don't know who does the changing of the light bulbs.
Jason.
Probably, right?
That's where you need a jetpack.
Public Works does the light bulbs.
No, but they were.
Sean does them? Yeah, you would need a lift to get up there. But, yeah. So does he just do all of them whenever he's up there? I hope. Yes. Yeah, my husband was commenting that the days are getting shorter, that he got to look at the stars on his way to work. Yeah, well, he leaves for work at 5:20. Yes, it is. Well, and he gets up a little after 4. And it's like, just do it all by him.
I had one outside of my office.
Test.
Arthritis and stuff. And so I'll just set a second alarm on Alexa.
Eyes closed.
Except he can't say her name. So I have to wake up.
Or all of you.
No, it always comes out Alexis. And she's not happy with that.
We had our central knowledge kickoff meeting today. As part of that, the owl stopped at a certain point too. So, where it's like, hey, we want to getting people on the roof thing, and said, hey, we lost audio and video. And so then I'm like trying to re-plug the owl back in.
I think the owl has flown the coop. I think we are without owl right now.
What does this mean? Should we just keep going or?
Well, we can, I'm discussing something that's this thing is better.
Alright, so it appears our microphone controller is dead. It's not working. Now, the problem that we have is that by law, we have to have access for our community to interact with us at this meeting. So if they can't, can they hear us on Zoom or not?
Okay, let me,
I've got the light
Okay,
feed right here.
so reconvene back downstairs. Well, potentially, but if they can hear us on Zoom, then that is sufficient. We just won't have a YouTube.
oh, wait a minute.
It's still on Zoom.
Can you hear us?
Yeah,
Okay.
it captured me telling this story about the owl. That's right there.
saying, as long as our Community Interact, then we are good to go. The problem is, that may have community members reach out to you that YouTube isn't working.
But we have a record.
But we'll have a record and
Okay.
they can't interact.
Just good.
It's just, so you're just gonna have to talk really, really loud so the owl can pick it up.
Okay.
All right, we're back all together. Sorry, folks that are watching, that we have a little technical stuff. We're going to go to our city manager. We're going to try to be a little bit expeditious because we know this is a little cumbersome, but I'll turn it to your report and then we'll go to the meeting, the new business.
Thank you, Mayor. As I noted before, most of this, council, you know from my weekly reports. I'm repeating it so that our community members actually hear what you hear. We're really happy to announce that our police department will be receiving traffic safety grants for increased patrols to cover seatbelt, Dewey, distracted driving, crosswalk, and speed enforcement beginning in October. These increased patrols will help keep our roads safe for everyone in our community, which of course is a high priority. We will have a contractor out at the wastewater treatment plant removing trees in the near future. Whenever we remove trees, we always get calls, so I want everyone to know we're removing them because they're leaning precariously toward neighborhood homes. Again, we're looking at safety, so we're going to have to remove them so they don't fall and injure people or property. Again, something really important to the community, the sidewalk project has started. We're very excited to have this up and running again. The youth participants have started work on the 2 bench pads for the donated benches along the Riverview Park walkway. This will give them much needed practice before they start on the sidewalks. We're working through a few bobbles and processes, but we're super excited to have this start. As we chatted a little bit, our summer concert series has seen record crowds, amazingly record crowds. This did cause a few growing pains, including a not quite enough restroom options. So we have fixed that by bringing in more portable restrooms for the remaining season. So hopefully, we'll get through that little bit of a growing pain. Then we are correlating all of the input that we received during the budgeting process, and we're already starting our next budget cycle. So we're starting all of that feedback, we're getting it in, we're starting our analysis. A lot of people think we stop budget after it passes, but we don't. We continue the work, and then we will gear up for all of our meetings early in 2024, and we'll get that out there. Finally, Emmanuel and Ashley created the first in the Meet Your City Staff series. They wanted the city manager to do that. I'm not comfortable in front of a camera, but Emmanuel did an amazing job, absolutely astoundingly amazing. And that video has gone very viral. It's had more views than so many of our other videos. People have loved it. They've picked it up. They've tossed it through Facebook. My peers, I'd had multiple horses in it. It did. And I think that's why it's gone viral. It's the horses. But Emmanuel did an amazing job. And I want everyone to see the work that he does, because he's getting that information out there, and he's getting good information. He's getting beautiful video out there, and we're getting great feedback. We're very blessed to have him. And that's what I have.
Great,
Yes,
Counselor.
Counselor. Don't know, Counselor. Fred, do you know anything about that?
I don't know, but I assume it's something associated with the stormwater plan.
Right.
I can give some information, Karen, if you wanted to add in.
Sure.
Go ahead.
Yeah, one morning I heard a lot of noise and I went outside, and they were actually doing a vac truck thing in the storm drain grates. And so I would assume that the green is to let us know which ones they've already done.
Yes, I talked to Gerald, and what they're doing is the city is cleaning out those that are on, if you'll all notice, those are all on State Highway 51. And that's something the state is supposed to do, but they haven't done for many, 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 many years. But we are doing that, and it's, we're helping them, and they'll hopefully be helping us. And so this is, it helps our total wastewater system. So that's what's going on, because I had the same thing in front of my house.
And then the other question is, trees on Gun Club, something that is.
Yeah, so the Trees on Gun Club, we're working with Monmouth Electric, and Councilor Core asked this question as well. And those were put in before we really had a tree plan, and they are going to grow up too tall and into the lines. So they're going to be removed, and new trees that work with the plan will go in. So we're taking them down. Well, a contractor is taking them down in coordination with Monmouth.
Okay, we're going to continue moving forward. We have a public hearing, and I have a script I have to read. And so here we go. This evening, we'll have a public hearing on legislative amendment 2023-03 to consider amendments to the Independence Development Code and Comprehensive Plan to implement the housing needs analysis. The City Council will make a final decision based on the complete record, including the testimony received at tonight's public hearing. These proceedings are being recorded. This hearing will be held in accordance with land use procedures required by the city and the state of Oregon. This is a type 4 legislative procedure. At the beginning of the public hearing tonight, staff will identify the applicable substantive criteria from the city's comprehensive plan and/or the state of Oregon statewide planning goals. For anyone wishing to speak, we are asked to use the speaker card that are provided. When called upon to speak, you'll be recognized and you'll state your name and address for the record. Before we begin, does any counselor wish to declare an actual or potential conflict of interest? I see no one raising their hands. Okay. I will now open the hearing for LA 2023-03, City Housing Needs Analysis and Development Code Amendment and Comprehensive Plan Amendments implementing the analysis. And we now have the staff report. Mr. Fred.
Yes, we do. Hey, Karen, do you have Jamin's?
Mhm.
Perfect. Yes. All right. Hi there, everybody. My name is Fred, and I'm here to present on the housing needs analysis tonight. Part of the reason that we are doing this project is because the city recently passed 10,000 people in population. In doing so, we became subject to all sorts of additional requirements under state law to update housing needs analysis and housing production strategies, which is a subsequent phase, every 8 years. So that is what we are here to do tonight. To consider this change, the substantive criteria that you're considering are included in the Oregon State Planning Goals, the Independence Comprehensive Plan, and the Independence Development Code. I noted those in my staff report, so I don't really feel like I need to go into two of them or all of them too much. If there's any questions, I'm happy to answer them. Otherwise, I'd be happy to hand this over to Jamin Kimmel from Cascadia Partners, who's been our consultant on this project. He will sort of identify what the changes are to the, it's a new document. The housing needs analysis is a new document that would replace our existing housing element in the comprehensive plan. There are some additional changes that are necessary outside of that document that he will note as well, things to make it clear, to have our housing regulations clear and objective. And so in looking at that, as part of the adoption of this, we realized, oh, we need to tweak regulations just a little bit to make sure that they work. Also, there are some changes proposed to the comprehensive plan. Jamin will address all of those things, but beyond that, like, we've gone through this project for a fair amount of time. We've tried to get public input through a number of different methods. We have produced, I think, 5 videos is what we said. I wore a sandwich board sign in downtown trying to get feedback from folks. We've been to places like the food bank, the library, the senior center. We've tried to solicit feedback, and we had a survey for this as well. The project has, I mean, we've worked hard on this project, and so based on all of that stuff, and I should say, you know, it's not just that we've gotten feedback, we've incorporated the feedback into the document. It's one thing to take feedback, it's another thing to then shape a document based on the feedback. And so we have done that with the feedback that we've received, and Jamin will address that a little as well.
So based on all of those things, I'm sort of up here as your planner to say these changes, we would recommend approval of these changes as proposed in front of you. That's sort of the staff report. Jamin, go for it.
Good evening, welcome to City Council.
Good evening, Mayor and Council, and I'll try to speak up because I know that's my mic over there, so let me just get my slide presentation up here. So if you can go ahead and go to the next slide, we'll go through our agenda. So as a reminder, my name is Jamin Kimmel. I'm a partner and a planner with Cascadia Partners. We are the consultant assigned to this project by the Department of Land Conservation and Development, who's funded the project through a grant. And we're doing a number of these housing needs analysis updates and housing production strategies for mainly smaller communities throughout the state. So glad to be here tonight. We presented to you on June 27th with an update to the housing needs analysis document and giving you an overview of the changes that have been made since the initial draft of it, which was developed in the spring. And so I'm going to go back through some of those changes for the benefit of the public hearing and as a reminder, but I'll do a fairly high-level presentation just to give you a reminder of what the contents of the housing needs analysis are, and then what it means in terms of changes to your comprehensive plan and development code in the short term, and then in the longer term, what the next steps are for housing planning for the city. So go ahead and go to the next slide. So to start off with some background, again, on the project to set the context, then go ahead and go to the next slide. And so with the passage of House Bill 2003 in 2019, the state legislature set out a new process or a revised process for larger cities to do planning for housing in Oregon. And so those are all cities over 10,000 in population, which Independence recently reached. And it's basically a two-phased process. The first phase is the housing needs or capacity analysis, which we've done today and are ready for you to consider adoption. And the main purpose of that document is to assess, does the city have capacity within its current urban growth boundary to accommodate housing needs over the next 20 years? And what are those housing needs, and what kinds of policies might need to be in place to make sure those housing needs are addressed? So that's the primary goal there. The next step after that is to move on to a housing production strategy. So you're really more focused on, with that planning process, to identify what specific development code, incentives, programs, public infrastructure projects might you implement over a 8-year time period in order to address your housing needs. So that document is much more specific about the actions you're going to take. And this document is really more addressing what are the needs and do we have capacity to manage that growth in the future. Go to the next slide. So as Fred mentioned, we've been working on this project for a little over a year now, and we had a few advisory committee meetings. We've been doing some community engagement, different kinds of activities and methods to try to involve the community in this and get their input and kind of what they're seeing on the ground in terms of what housing issues and needs people have. And now we're at the stage of the project to move into finalizing and adopting the report. And so that's what we're here today for you to consider. Go ahead to the next slide. So a few updates on that community engagement. So in the first phase of the project, our main method of reaching out to the community was to put some information out on the city's webpage and to do an online community survey, which we got several hundred responses to, which was a pretty good response. We're pleased to see that. Then we started to produce a draft of the housing needs analysis, put out some more information, and did a second round of community engagement, which included a couple of different informational videos, some kind of open house style events that Fred mentioned at the senior center, library, and some other locations, and Fred going out and doing some informal kind of surveys of the community. So had some good conversations, and then with the survey, took all that information together and started to identify what are some of the key themes that we're hearing from the community. Go to the next slide. So in the housing needs analysis report, we've pulled out some of those key themes and identified them in a section of the report. And so these are summarized here on this slide. And I won't go through each of them in detail, but I think some of the issues that we have discussed before should look familiar. There's some new kind of specific housing needs and issues that we wanted to make sure were included and reflected in the document. So those are things such as a desire for more family-friendly housing options. So noting that if you can't afford a single-family house, that there's not a lot of other options. If you have a family, to have something that's livable, has some outdoor space that works for you. And so we reflected that in the document as a desire and a need in the community. And also something we heard a lot of is a need for kind of age-friendly and accessible housing. So options for someone that is ready to downsize or needs a home that's actually accessible because they are dealing with a disability or are elderly and having trouble moving about in their home. And so we wanted to also have that reflected in the document as a specific kind of need that really what hasn't been addressed in the city's policies before. Go to the next slide. So moving into some of the more technical analysis that we've done as part of the housing needs analysis. So as was mentioned, that one of the primary questions that we're trying to answer here is, does the city have enough capacity for new housing development to meet needs over the next 20 years? And so we project the 20-year need based on your population growth and other demographic and characteristics of your existing housing stock, and we project what is the future housing stock most likely to look like, and then compare that to the capacity within the buildable lands in the city on your existing zoning. And so the capacity is in terms of the number of dwelling units, and then we break that down by type of housing. It's important to plan for a variety of housing types. And so what this table shows is our final housing capacity analysis, which compares the 20-year need to the estimated capacity for each type. And the key takeaways really here is there's a significant surplus of capacity for single-family detached housing, and there is less of a surplus for some of the higher density housing types, townhouses, duplexes or triplexes, and then full multifamily apartment buildings. There just is not as many zones where those housing types are allowed in the city, and there's not much buildable land left in those zones. And so as a result, there's just not as much capacity for those housing types to be built. There's less need for them. So if you can see, for example, for multifamily units, there's a need for 380 units over the next 20 years. There's a need for almost 1,400 single-family detached homes. So the need's not quite as high, but also the capacity is significantly lower. And so that's one of the challenges we identified in moving forward is the city doesn't need to expand the UGB. That's one key finding here. There's enough buildable land to accommodate your housing needs. But there's a kind of a mismatch in the buildable land that's available and what it's zoned for and what the projected need is. And there's kind of an imbalance here where there's going to be potentially going to be more difficult for developers to find land to build those higher density housing types. Can we go to the next slide? This is a couple bit details on our methodology for projecting housing capacity and estimating it. It's not a straightforward process. So if you have any questions about some of our assumptions we have to make in doing that analysis, we'd be glad to answer those. The two bigger changes are to how we estimated the capacity in the commercial zones, because housing is allowed in those zones. And then also in the mixed density zone, which is the MX zone shown there in green on the map, which allows for a variety of housing types. And so we had to make some assumptions about what percentage of the housing in there will be of each type. So I can answer any questions you have on those assumptions. Go ahead to the next slide. Okay, so I'll go here now into some of the recommended land use strategies. And so I want to emphasize these are kind of conceptual recommendations at this stage. And so we put these together because you'll be moving into your housing production strategy in the next phase. having done this work to look at your capacity, we looked at your zoning code in detail, we talked to the community, we learned a lot of things from doing that. And so we want to document some of the things that we would recommend that the city consider when they move forward in preparing your housing production strategy, but also if there are other projects that are ongoing that may affect housing related regulations that you might want to consider incorporating some of these ideas. And so these, most of these changes, or I should say all these changes, there are no code amendments proposed today to adopt them. These are for future implementation. So just really recommendations at this stage. And so several of them, I think all of them on this first page here, are different ways to either remove barriers to development of those higher density housing types. So those are code standards that we saw could be a barrier to development, or to expand capacity for developing those. So to open up new areas where apartments or townhomes could be developed. Those are different ways that could be accomplished. I'll go ahead and go to the next slide. Several of these are also related to some of those housing types, but there are also some recommendations that are more specific to certain kinds of housing. So we talked a little bit about cottage cluster housing in last previous meetings, which is a kind of a distinct housing type that's not really addressed in the code today, not defined, and there's been more developers interested in building it. So defining and allowing that would be a good step for the city to take. I'll just point out kind of two others here, which I think are specific to some issues that we heard in the community. One, evaluating ways to encourage more family-friendly housing. And so this may look like looking at your minimum open space or recreation standards that go with new multifamily development. So are those giving you the kind of open space that is kind of livable and functional for people? Is that something that people are actually using? Is it working how it's supposed to be intended? May also be requiring a minimum open space when you build something like a townhouse on a small lot, kind of a very small yard that can't be very functional. So those are the kinds of things that are described in that recommendation. And then number 9 there, consider density bonus incentives for affordable or accessible units. So what that's referring to there is ways that the city could try to provide an incentive through regulations for a developer to include units that are like income restricted affordable housing. So if you build, if you include 10% of the units in this project to be affordable to people with lower incomes, then we'll give you a density bonus. You can build more than the code would allow you to otherwise, or a bonus in the maximum height a building can be. So those are some things that the city could consider. Really, I think most appropriate for those to be considered as part of your housing production strategy, but we're identifying them here to try to kind of memorialize what we heard in the community and then looking at your code.
Jamin, I'm
Sure.
a little thrown by the family-friendly housing terminology, and the reason why is I live alone, but I have the same size house, same size yard as families on my street. So are we somehow differentiating between need here? Because just because I'm not a family necessarily doesn't mean I don't want green space and I don't want more space.
Yeah, that's a good point. I think it's I think many of the kind of code changes that we identify in that section in the report would benefit many kinds of households and single households and households without children. But where we heard it from the community was mostly from people with children, families with children. And so I think the title says family-friendly housing doesn't necessarily mean that those wouldn't be beneficial to other kinds of households.
I think people with pets may have some of the same needs.
Right, yeah, I guess that's a good point, yeah.
Just saying.
Go ahead and continue.
Okay, go ahead to the next slide. Okay, that's okay, you can skip right ahead. So there are some amendments needed to the city's comprehensive plan to incorporate the housing needs analysis. So this is by incorporating this document into your comprehensive plan, this is how you demonstrate compliance with the state requirement to have a housing needs analysis that studies your housing needs and demonstrates that you have capacity within your UGB to meet your needs. And so we looked at the housing section of the comprehensive plan and revise some of the existing stated policy goals in there. And I'll go through a couple of those. The overall goal in the comprehensive plan really talked about kind of just a variety of housing choices and meeting the needs of the community. It was a bit vague. And so we recommended changing it to specifically say that the city is committed to providing affordable housing options for all community members. So just kind of emphasizing, again, the thing we heard many, many times is affordability is really the biggest concern in the community right now. And then there is a housing mix policy, which says that the city would it's a stated goal to try to broaden the mix of housing types and to plan for at least 30% of new housing to be in the document. It says multifamily housing, and we just broadened that to say multifamily housing, townhomes, cottage cluster housing, to allow other housing types to fit into that category of not a conventional single family house. And so I think that's more consistent with what we heard in terms of having a diversity of housing types available in the community. There's actually 4 new policies that are proposed to be added to respond to some of those needs and issues. And so if you actually go to the next slide, that we put the actual language of the policies in there. So it's policy 2 and 3, which have to do with having affordable homeownership options and affordable rental housing options. So distinguishing between those to usually different kinds of housing types. And then policy 12 is about housing for all ages and abilities. So as I mentioned, the concern for having age-friendly and accessible housing. And then lastly, policy 14 for family-friendly housing, which includes both larger family-sized units where those are needed, and especially rental units that are larger, but also for high-quality outdoor areas and open space. So those are the new housing policies. I think you can skip that slide. We've covered the adoption process. And then so we'll skip over to now the development code amendments that are included in this package for adoption. And so Fred mentioned this at the outset. In order to show that the city has capacity to meet its housing needs, that housing which is allowed and counting towards your capacity estimates must be allowed under what's called clear and objective standards. And so under state law, that means that the rules that apply to when a developer proposes that kind of housing must be usually quantifiable, relatively clear, not include relatively vague statements that are left to the discretion of the Planning Commission to interpret. So those kinds of things can be applied to housing developments, but they must be an alternative to a set of clear and objective standards. So there must be this approval pathway is called for housing that is clear and objective, and in most cases could be approved by staff. So without the need for a Planning Commission hearing. There can be a Planning Commission hearing, but those standards under which the commission reviews the project must be clear and objective. And so as we look through the code, we identified just a couple of changes that would be needed in order to remove standards that would be not considered to be clear and objective. And so I'll go through those here. Get to the next slide. So there's 2 places where those are. Subchapter 17, which is the allowed uses. And so really just one change there. In the MX, mixed density zone, which is a lot of Southwest Independence, and a lot of buildable land remaining in that zone, a few large developments. Multifamily housing is required to have a conditional use permit, and a conditional use permit is subject to approval criteria, which are pretty universally in other cities wouldn't be considered clear and objective. And so as we reviewed those, we thought that would need to be an alternative approval track, could not be the main way in which multifamily housing is approved in that zone. And so the recommendation is to change multifamily housing to a permitted use in the MX zone. And so it's no longer required to go through a conditional use process. Instead, it would be required to go through what's called a site design review process. And so that would be reviewed by staff, could be appealed to a planning commission. There's disagreement about that approval, but it would no longer be required to go to the planning commission. And so, for example, if a apartment project were proposed in that zone, some of those areas in Southwest Independence where there's some large master planned developments, larger subdivisions, some parts of those have identified areas for multifamily housing. Those new multifamily housing would just be approved through staff. And there'd be notice to the community, as there is with all of these kinds of applications, but there would not be a planning commission public hearing. So that's the one change to the MX zone. And then in the site design review process, there are some approval criteria for those applications, which are not clear and objective. And even though they're approved by staff, they are kind of vague and discretionary, offer a little too much discretion to staff. And so most of those standards are mostly, as we read them, written more specific to commercial and industrial development, but they're also applied to residential. And so the recommendation there is actually to create a separate set of approval standards for commercial and industrial development and residential development. And the residential development standards would only be clear and objective. For commercial and industrial, there are other standards that are not clear and objective. So most of those spoke to things like encouraging things like habitat-friendly development practices. That's a really great goal and a good approval criteria, but it isn't clear and objective what that means in a particular project. And so for that reason, it can't be applied to housing. Okay, so those are the code amendments, and those are included in your packet. And I think we go to the next slide, and so, yeah, you've had the housing needs analysis report, which will be incorporated into the comprehensive plan by a reference, those comprehensive plan policy changes, and those two sets of code amendments. And those are really the package of documents that are up for adoption today, and be glad to talk through any of that with you.
Questions for the presenter? I have one, and I just want to make sure I'm clear. So this is required that we, the things that you are recommending are state required kinds of things that we have to do.
The code amendments specifically are, yes. To adopt a housing needs analysis, generally, yes, it's required that you do that. And if you found a deficit of capacity, you'd be required to address it. We didn't find that. We found that you had enough capacity. So the other kinds of code amendments, that would be things like removing barriers to or rezoning certain areas. Those are recommendations that we think are a good idea and would be for further consideration, but are not required to be implemented under state law.
So if I may follow up, so what we're doing tonight then is we're having the public hearing related to this so that we can have any input. We have staff report, and then so at a later date, and I'm looking to you, Fred, that we'll have the formal adoption.
I'm hoping the next city council meeting, the ordinance will be ready and be before you, so long as you votes. There is a recommended motion in your packet, or on the screen that says, that
Yep.
essentially drives us to parents.
Right. And then additional additional things will happen as this process evolves. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's right. So any of like the recommended strategies that changes is made in the document, all of those will be talked about and further as part of the housing production strategy. And if any of those changes go forward, there will be planning commission hearings, there will be things before you as well.
Additional questions for the presenter tonight?
Is
Go ahead, Counselor
I
Joe.
know that schools are not a part of any of this, but is that ever something that is considered like location or where we could have another school or something, just because I feel like that could become an issue over the next 20 years? Is that?
So in my experience in this specific process, you're really just looking citywide, is there enough capacity in your urban growth boundary to meet your long-term needs? And in that case, then the kind of appropriate locations for schools would not really be part of that, because you're really just, you're summing it up all at a citywide, and it's a citywide planning process. But when you get to, okay, what areas may be appropriate to rezone, or to, if we change some of the code standards that may result in higher densities in certain places, and there's more population in certain parts of town, at that point, I think that would be someplace to partner with the school district, make sure they're aware of it, and talk through what the implications of that could be for school enrollment and school capacity. But at this stage, it's really just taking your population projections and looking at it citywide.
Mr. Vander, did you want to add anything to that?
Well, I mean, the central school district is going through a long-range facilities plan right now, or else they just recently completed it. I know that they're well aware that both Independence and Monmouth are growing south.
Okay, thank you. Please, Counselor Roden.
I think it was just part of the strategy, but I wanted to confirm that your strategy for implementing some low-income housing in a high-density area, it was to come back with maybe have benefits for the builder to increase height or make the units smaller. That's not something that's something we'll be working on in the next step. Am I correct in that? Okay.
Yeah,
That was, we were on the same page with asking that. Counselor Morton.
Couple of things. First of all, I know that it's part of the state law. Are ADUs specifically addressed in here, other than just referring them to the state law and what is required there?
Yeah, so I think we mentioned ADUs as a housing type that is important to consider to continue to promote in some of the policies as an example of a type of housing that's needed. And we looked at your code pertaining to ADUs, and we did not find any of the standards to be like a significant barrier to developing them. So we didn't address any strategies specific to supporting them, but I think they're important part of the mix.
And following, kind of two more parts here, following that, if someone does construct an ADU, or that's the appropriate thing to do to get a low-income family in, or someone who's not a high earner who is in need of housing, are any of the barriers to the extra costs for doing an ADU on your own property or someone else's owned property, are there any barriers that are coming down for that, or will there be high fees that make it impractical?
Yeah, I think in terms of, we've mostly just looked at the zoning code, and so, or the development code, excuse me. So in terms of the development code, I don't think any of those standards could make it more costly to build and harder to serve a low-income family because of the cost of complying with the regulations. So I don't think any of, in the development code specifically. That said, there are sometimes building code requirements that can make it costlier to build ADUs. There's sometimes, and you mentioned fees, so things like the system development charges, those could be a barrier if they're applied to ADUs. So some cities have provided exemptions or reduced fees for accessory dwelling units that are built by a homeowner.
And I'm also thinking of application of SDCs on a property that's already built on.
Yes, yeah, exactly. For that reason, many cities have provided exemptions because they think, well, a home is already here, they're doing another home, but it's a small home, and so it's not likely to have as much of an impact, and we'll give it a deal because we want this to happen. We think it's good to have these variety of housing options.
And then finally, when you're talking about making sure that there are opportunities for low-income earners to be able to rent or purchase on a more reasonable basis. Is there a tie to what, for instance, minimum income is and limiting the amount that can be charged under certain circumstances for rent?
Sure. So in this case, for your housing needs analysis, we looked at the development code, and in the development code today, there are no requirements associated with any housing being developed to be restricted to be affordable to certain income levels. And so we didn't assess that today, but part of that recommendation to consider some, we would recommend incentives for that rather than a requirement. But would be considering what income level do we want to incentivize for a developer to try to build for. And so there's very different levels that cities often target.
Because at this point in time, there's a huge swath of the population in this community that cannot afford to rent or buy on their own.
Exactly, and in many cases, we're finding that even someone earning 100% the median income definitely can't afford to buy. You need to be upwards of 120% of the median income in many cases, and even someone earning the median income or 80% of the median income is struggling to find an affordable rental even. And so in many cases, cities are saying, if you produce home ownership housing that's affordable at the median income, 100% of the median income, then we'll offer you an incentive. And so that what level you target is an important.
So the things
part of
that you're talking about with Councilor Morton here, those are in the production strategy, those are
Yes.
coming in the future. So right now, we're just doing the zoning stuff.
Yep.
Okay.
Yeah, but we like to include it so you can kind of start to think about
Right.
those things. There's a lot to think about, and
Right, I just wanted to make sure because
Yeah.
there's a whole host of additional choices to make, and I want to make sure that we keep the choices in the right place, because otherwise we can get additional questions for the presenter at this time. Okay, thank you. Fred, did you have anything you wanted to use as cleanup before I close the hearing?
No,
Okay,
that's it, unless you have any questions.
okay. I now, if there's anybody in the audience who wants to speak up about this, and I see no one moving towards the microphone, so without objection, I'm going to close the hearing. And the record, thank you. So we have, in front of you, you have a motion that we can approve what we are talking about tonight, the zoning related issues, the other changes, and then additional documents will come in the future. Does that sound okay?
I move to approve file number LA 2023-03, the city's housing needs analysis 2023, and the comprehensive plan and development code language implementing that analysis, including associated findings, conditions, and staff recommendations as provided in the staff report, and direct staff to bring an ordinance reflecting council's approval to the next regularly scheduled council meeting for consideration and potential adoption.
I have a motion second by Martin Willis. Okay, discussion. All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
And opposed. Motion carries. Thank you very much. Thank you, folks. Appreciate that. Thank you for the presentation this evening as we continue to move forward. We are now to any general announcements that need to be made.
Yes.
Please.
I was part of a meeting, in a meeting earlier today for the Central Talmadge Planning Committee. Was invited to be on that, and I wanted to commend Fred on his very good presentation there, and also I really felt like he had all the right people at the table. The next Independence Downtown Association quarterly meeting is at 6 p.m. on August 24th at Valkyrie Wine Tavern. And come on down, because there are lots of things happening in downtown, including Hop Heritage Festival, starting with the Mexican dancing horses and ending with a Ty Curtis concert. And then there's.
Do we
this-
put those together and have dancing horses
With
as
Ty
Ty?
Curtis?
My mind is blown. Keep going.
And then this little thing coming up the month after that, the Ghost Walk.
There you go. Additional announcements, please, Counselor Roden.
I was just gonna say that the IndieWorks app does not seem to be working, and I have used it myself, and I never see a response or anything being done on it. And I was just looking at it before the meeting, and a lot of people in the city are putting stuff on the IndieWorks app, and I don't think they're being heard. So I think that's something that needs to be addressed. The other thing that I would like to talk about is, I think Independence does a great job with this, but another national report came out about loneliness and how it's affecting people in our communities nationwide. I appreciate other counselors coming forward and making announcements on things for people to do, because I really think it's important that we reconnect.
Thank you, Counselor. Counselor Schwartzler.
An announcement that the library will be starting a new training room for the Center on Rural Education, and we're super excited about it. It's the first library meeting, which they're very, very excited about, and so we will be starting to sign kids up very soon, if not already. And so if you have kiddos that are interested in coding and learning how to code, we will start up this fall.
Great, thank you. Wonderful. Okay,
Mayor,
please.
IndieWorks, we're aware of Councilor Roden's concern, and I think you're working on that, and
Thank you. Thank you, appreciate that. So without objection, we're adjourned.